75 million. That is the lower end of the estimated number of deaths from 1346 to 1353 caused by the Black Death, which I'll be informing the students of Communications 110 about today. I'll be discussing the origin, effect, and aftermath of the deadly epidemic, starting with how it all began. An MPH online article written by an unnamed MPH staff accessed on June 24th says that the Black Death is one of the top 10 worst pandemics in history, and might even be the worst pandemic in history. But where did this horrific bubonic plague originate? Well, it's still mostly unknown, but according to Catherine Carver in a June 21st, 2022 article on Medical News Today, it is believed to have first been transmitted to a human in 1338 in modern-day Kyrgyzstan. It was caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, which is first believed to have been transmitted from fleas to rats, and then from rats to humans eventually. In 1347, it started a pandemic in which 60% of the Western Eurasian population was annihilated by 1355. That's all for the origin of the plague. Next, I'll explain how exactly this disease changed life for the general public in Africa and Europe, as well as its political and economic impacts. In other words, its effect. Towns were the hardest hit areas, with dense populations and man-made pollutions just accentuating the spread of the bacterium. Some entire families were wiped out, not to mention soldiers dragged into sudden conflicts, short-lasting wars, and even trade disputes. In addition, many laborers and general workers, artisans, landowners, and nobility were all struck by the plague. Land was no longer being cultivated in the way that it was beforehand, and overall labor was drastically reduced, which caused large stunts in the economy, according to Encyclopedia Britannica, which was accessed June 24th and had no named writer. However, Alfani Guido, in a June 2020 article for History and Policy, highlighted the positive effects of the Black Death, such as agrarian products being reorganized more efficiently, big wage increases, and large redistribution of wealth. This concludes my second point, the effect. Finally, we'll talk about the aftermath of the pandemic and talk about what it left behind. Ultimately, there were very few governmental changes, at least serious, that can be attributed to the Black Death. However, many socioeconomic changes were enacted, such as people were faced with death. Joshua J. Mark said in his April 2020 article on world history that the widespread fear of death one had not earned, could not see coming, and could not escape, inspired them to rethink the way they were living previously and the kinds of values that they held. Ultimately, women were allowed to become landowners, and animal husbandry replaced small grain farming. The Protestant Reformation also occurred soon after most of the devastation had ended, and most other Renaissance advances made their way into the limelight. Medicine also finally started down a new path, as doctors were killed off and little could be done to stop the plague. And while the epidemic eventually ended, the Black Death still continued taking lives all the way up until the late 1800s, almost the 1900s, when the first treatment was first discovered. That finishes the aftermath of the plague. So, after explaining the origin, effect, and the aftermath of the Black Death, I'd like to show how bad it really was. For comparison, the flu caused approximately 20 to 50 million deaths, and that is just in a single pandemic. The plague of Justinian, 25 million, and the Spanish flu, possibly 100 million. And this is compared to the 70 to 200 million possible deaths by the Black Death plague victims, which just goes to show how ridiculously serious diseases, and in particular the Black Death, can have been.